Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Record high inflation, soaring crime rates, and war in Europe. Americans are weighing in on President Biden's performance. The latest polls show his approval rating at the lowest point of his presidency.
In one effort to stop the skid, the president unveiled his 2023 budget plan Monday. It highlights increased funding for the military and law enforcement while promising to cut inflation. CBN's Jenna Browder reports from Washington.
The president's $5.8 trillion proposal looks to address some of the more pressing issues on voters' minds, especially in a midterm year in areas where Democrats could be on shaky ground. The budget stresses defense and safety. With Russia's war in Ukraine still ongoing, the president wants Congress to fund more than $813 billion for national security, up more than $31 billion over last year, including more than $680 million for Ukraine's defense efforts and bolstering cybersecurity and defense systems in the U.S.
This budget provides the resources we need to keep Americans safe, ensuring that our military remains the best prepared, best trained, best equipped military in the world.
Here at home, the president is looking to distance himself from defund the police calls, proposing $20 billion for the Department of Justice to use on crime prevention programs and federal law enforcement, and $30 billion for new law enforcement, crime prevention, and community violence intervention over the next decade.
The answer is not to defund our police departments. It's to fund our police and give them all the tools they need, training and foundation, and partners and protectors that our communities need.
The president is also proposing a so-called billionaires tax, a 20% minimum tax rate for the wealthiest Americans to reduce the deficit. He says it will help cut inflation.
If this new tax even passes, and that's really highly questionable, it's very unlikely, almost certain it will not bring in the amount of money that the Biden people say it will. So the annual deficits are going to remain high, and the national debt's going to keep going up. We're at $30 trillion now, and we're headed to $40 trillion.
All this as new polling from NBC News shows the president's lowest approval rating yet. Only 40% approve of his job performance. A staggering 66% disapprove of his handling of the economy. And the economy isn't the president's only problem area. 7 out of 10 Americans say they have low confidence in his ability to handle the Russia-Ukraine crisis. In his recent trip to Europe, the president's staff had to walk back several verbal gaffes, suggesting to U.S. troops they were going to Ukraine, saying the U.S. would respond in kind to chemical attacks by Russia, and this ad-lib about Russian President Vladimir Putin.
For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
Yesterday, the president refused to take it back.
I'm not walking anything back. The fact of the matter is I was expressing the moral outrage, and I make no apologies for it.
As to whether the president's budget proposal can help right the ship, analysts point out the president merely makes suggestions. It's up to Congress to write the budget. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Well, CBN chief political analyst David Brody is with us now. So, David, let's just start with the poll numbers. Is this budget going to budge them at all?
I don't think so, Gordon. I think that train has left the station. There's a narrative out there about Joe Biden, and it's not a good one, unfortunately, for the president. Look, but if you look at inside those numbers, I mean, he's down everywhere. I mean, he's not just down with independents from 36% to 32%. He's down with blacks, Hispanics, women. I mean, it runs the gamut. And so that's where you get to that 40% approval number, which is so abysmally low because he's not just losing Republicans. He lost them a long time ago. He's lost independents, and now he's starting to lose his own base. And I think that's part of the problem, and I think that's what we saw a bit in this budget, right? I mean, this idea of funding the police, increasing the military spending, you put it all together, he's trying to kind of recoup some of those independents, and that's kind of where he's going with this. But once again, a lot of damage has already been done. You kind of made your bed, if you will, with the progressives in the party and try to be this next FDR in the first year of your term. It did not work well. You spent a lot of money. What is it, $6-7 trillion? I've lost count with the American Rescue Plan and other, other bills that were passed. And so you put it all together, and now you're trying to put the genie back in the bottle. Very, very difficult.
Well, let's talk about the Democrat base and the progressives in particular. The call to defund the police, the call for all these, from my point of view, it just boggles the mind. Why would you ever want to defund your police department? But he's trying to get on the other side of that. Is he eroding his own base going into the midterms?
Well, it's a great question, Gordon. I think that the calculation inside the White House is this. Do you get, in terms of the midterm elections, which, by the way, we expect a red wave, and it might be just too late anyhow, but if you're going to have some sort of shot to salvage something in midterm elections, do you get the progressives on board or do you get the independents on board? And I think clearly, look, follow the money. And the money in the budget suggests that it's really going to be more about trying to get those independents back rather than the progressives. Now, having said that, Gordon, let's also remember, beyond this idea that he wants to fund the police and that's not going over well with the progressives, he is trying to help the progressives. He's trying to kind of give them a few caveats here, and one of them is climate funding. I mean, he's increased climate funding in this budget over last year by $16 billion, and he wants to give $1.6 billion of that to United Nations Green New Deal Fund, whatever they want to call it over there at the United Nations. But $1.6 million of American taxpayer money would go to the United Nations as part of this. So, look, it's not like it's all wonderful for independence. He has some progressive nods and winks in the budget as well.
Well, let's talk about the just sheer size of this budget. I mean, there are a lot of individual items that you can point to, but at the same time, it adds up to $5.6 trillion. And he's calling it that somehow or other this is going to fight inflation. Do they really not understand the more government prints money, which is what is happening here, the more you expand the money supply, which is going to be needed? You can say it's paid for all you want, but all you're doing is borrowing from future generations of Americans. So do they not get that this is inflationary?
Well, it's a great question, and honestly, not even rhetorical. I mean, you have to really wonder, do they not get it? You know, Larry Summers, the former Obama senior economic advisor, you would think would be supportive of Biden policies. He's not. He said that American Rescue Plan that was supposed to provide COVID relief, it only provided 5 to 10% of the money was COVID relief, said it was a way much of a bridge too far. And so, look, you're talking $5-6 trillion, maybe even more, depending on real money, and then you have to ask that question. So I think there is clearly a problem. Also, there's a smoke and mirrors aspect to all of this. You know, this idea that, that it's going to balance the budget. I mean, in what fantasy world is that happening in exactly? But this is what Congress does. It's not just, Biden and his administration. Republicans will do it as well. They'll somehow do fuzzy math and try to do all of this to come up with a figure. No, clearly it's a problem, Gordon. And look, here's the other problem with this budget. They are making these calculations and assumptions based on the fact that inflation will return to normal levels. Yeah, well, so apparently the budget is not just a policy document, but it's a comedy material as well, because I don't think anybody thinks inflation is going to return to normal levels anytime in the next 6 months or so.
Well, let's talk about something that is even more serious than the current inflationary environment. His statements on that European tour, if I'm in charge of Russian military forces, I absolutely get the message that there's not going to be any peace agreement we can come to. What are they trying to do in terms of walking it back? And then he comes around and says, I'm not walking anything back. Is this going to eventually get us into a war in Europe?
Well, that's the concern, and I think it's a real concern. Like the last thing we need right now is hyperbole and dramatic statements. But look, this is straight up analysis. Yes. I mean, this is the type of rhetoric, call it a bungle, a gaffe, call it serious or not, they can land us right into a World War III. And look, I mean, what Biden did there is gave Putin a talking point. Forget about what Germany and NATO and others think at this point. It's what does Putin think? I mean, Putin's going to pipe that into Soviet media, if you will, and say, you see, I told you so. The president of the United States is in essence for a coup against me and our government. I mean, that's what he's going to say. And so here's the problem for the Biden administration. Was it a walk back or not? At first, it was the sense that it was a walk back. They were trying to walk it back. And then Biden, as we just saw in Jenna's piece, said he's not walking anything back. So there are so many mixed messages here. And this is the last thing anyone needs is any mixed messages here. Clarity is key, and we're not getting much of it.
All right. Well, David, thanks for the insight. And for anyone watching, please pray for our president. Please pray for our leadership. I know it's sometimes difficult to pray for those who are in power, but he needs unusual wisdom. These are very difficult times we're all facing. And you may not agree with his policies. I certainly don't. But that still doesn't mean I don't have a requirement as a Christian to pray for those in leadership. Well, let's turn to other news. More fallout from the Oscars, the whole alopecia with Jada Pinkett Smith. I just want to say my mother has lived with that disease for a quarter of a century. And I understand what it does. And I understand what it does to your willingness to even go out in public and be seen. And I just applaud her for the dignity to say, I'm going to go to the Oscar ceremony. I'm going to have my disease broadcast around the world. The problem with it is there's no cure. There's no medical science doesn't even know the source and why it happens. So I applaud her for her dignity in just saying, I'm going to show up and I'm going to learn to live with this disease. That's what my mother has done now for a quarter of a century. I know the cost it takes, and I applaud her for it. For more on the story, we go to Ephraim Graham with the CBN Newsroom. Ephraim?
Gordon, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences says it is considering further actions and consequences against actor Will Smith. Meanwhile, Smith issued a public apology to comedian Chris Rock Monday. Smith slapped Rock across the face during Sunday's live Oscar broadcast after a joke about his wife, Jada Pinkett Smith. In his Instagram apology, Will Smith said he was out of line and wrong, and that he reacted emotionally to the joke about his wife's shaved head, which is due to a medical condition called alopecia. Later in the ceremony, Will Smith won his first Academy Award for Best Actor in King Richard. In his acceptance speech, he revealed a piece of spiritual advice Denzel Washington gave him.
Denzel said to me a few minutes ago, he said, at your highest moment, be careful, that's when the devil comes for you.
Academy officials reportedly considered removing Smith from the theater after the incident. It is unclear if Chris Rock knew about Jada Pinkett Smith's medical condition. Turning now to the war in Eastern Europe, Ukrainian and Russian officials met for peace talks for the first time in weeks, beginning today in Istanbul, Turkey. Ukraine's president said his country is prepared to declare its neutrality and not to join NATO, and is open to compromise over the contested Donbas region in the east. The talks come as Russian forces are still bombarding cities and villages in Ukraine, leaving buildings and streets in ruins. Ukrainian forces are claiming new victories, including the city of Irpin, just north of Kyiv. Millions of Ukrainians are displaced from their homes and suffering shortages of food and water. CBN's Operation Blessing is helping meet their needs by sending fresh produce across the border from its warehouse in Poland.
We are here at our Operation Blessing warehouse in Poland, not far from the Ukrainian border, from where we receive lots of shipments of produce that go straight into Ukraine. And behind me you see a truck being loaded with fresh produce, like these oranges and apples and mandarins and wonderful, nutritious food that will really help the people in Ukraine right now, because there's such a shortage and there's such a demand. And these items will go across the border straight away, so in a few hours they will be offloaded onto vans that will go straight into the communities in Ukraine, where people will be using those very fresh produce to feed their families and feed their children. And it's all possible because of your support. So thank you very much for your generous giving.
There you see Operation Blessing in perfect position to offer assistance. Gordon?
It's wonderful to be a help to those in need, and it's wonderful to have so many people supporting the effort. Thank you. If you're part of the Operation Blessing Disaster Relief Fund, thank you. On behalf of all the refugees, all the Orphans Promise Centers in Ukraine, the surrounding countries, thank you. You're doing your part. If you want to be a part of it, all you have to do is pick up the phone and call us, 1-800-700-7000. Just say, I want to give to the Operation Blessing Disaster Relief Fund. You can also write to us at CBN Center, Virginia Beach, Virginia. Just put Disaster Relief Fund in the memo line of a check. You can text us, OB Crisis, to 71777, or you can just go online at cbn.com. There's a place where you can designate your gift to the Disaster Relief Fund. Do it now. Be part of helping those in need.